Hey guys, tonight we're starting a new story, a slow, steady, and very real journey through one of the most powerful names in history. We're talking about Rockefeller. The name sounds like power, money, oil. But behind that name is a story of quiet ambition, calculated risk, and a legacy that shaped entire nations. So before you sit back, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is your kind of thing. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It always helps to know who else is out there in the quiet with us. Now, turn down the lights, maybe grab a drink, and let's begin. There was a time when America didn't run on oil. It ran on wood, coal, steam, and guesswork. The idea of a single man controlling the very veins of energy beneath the earth would have sounded like fantasy. But John D. Rockefeller didn't grow up in fantasy. He grew up in shadows. Born in 1839 in Richford, New York, he was the second of 6 children in a family that didn't always know where the next meal was coming from. His father, William Rockefeller, was a traveling salesman, the kind of man who sold potions, lies, and whatever else he could fit in a suitcase. He called himself a doctor. He wasn't. He vanished for weeks, sometimes months, left his wife to raise the children and keep the house running. And young John learned 2 things early. That money was security, and that trust was a luxury. He wasn't born into wealth. He wasn't a prodigy. He was a quiet boy who liked numbers and hated waste. He didn't dream of mansions or gold. He dreamed of order, of balance sheets, of things adding up. At age 16, he got his first real job, assistant bookkeeper. Not a glamorous title, but it was his doorway. He learned how to track money, how to predict costs, how to see patterns where others saw noise. He didn't work fast. He worked precisely. He believed every cent had a purpose and every deal needed to make sense on paper before it made sense in life. Then came oil. In the 1850s, people started finding thick black liquid seeping out of the ground in Pennsylvania. At first, no one knew what to do with it. It stank. It caught fire easily. But someone figured out you could refine it into kerosene. And kerosene made lamps burn longer, steadier, cheaper. Suddenly, this dark sludge was worth something. And Rockefeller noticed. Not because he liked oil, but because he understood systems. The oil industry at the time was chaos. Wells popped up like mushrooms. Prices rose and crashed like waves. Everyone was gambling. Rockefeller didn't gamble, he calculated. In his 20s, he started a refining business in Cleveland. Not drilling, not exploring, refining, the part of the process most people ignored. He picked the quiet part, the stable part, the part he could control. He partnered with people who understood chemistry. He hired smart, fired smarter, cut waste, reused barrels, bought his own wagons, negotiated with railroads. Bit by bit, he made his refinery better, cleaner, cheaper than anyone else's. And while others bragged about striking oil, he quietly built a network that moved it, cleaned it, and sold it. He didn't make his fortune with luck. He made it with patience and fear, not his own, others. When he offered to buy a rival refinery, it came with a simple message. Join us or be crushed, not screamed, not shouted. delivered like a weather report, cold, factual, inevitable. Many joined, some resisted. Those who resisted lost rail contracts, lost suppliers, lost the ability to compete. And while Rockefeller smiled politely, their businesses disappeared. By 1870, he founded Standard Oil, a name that would become legend, not just for wealth, for control. At its peak, Standard Oil refined 90% of the kerosene in America. That's not a company. That's a machine. But it didn't feel loud. It wasn't fireworks and gold bars. It was ledgers, rail deals, discounts, everything hidden behind polite letters and handshake agreements. Rockefeller believed in silence, in predictability, in playing the long game. And by the time anyone realized how big Standard Oil had become, it was already too big to stop. And that's just the beginning. Because as Rockefeller refined oil, he also refined power. And in the next chapter, we'll follow how he took that power, spread it across states, and began shaping the very laws meant to stop him. When people talk about empires, they imagine armies, crowns, flags. But Rockefeller didn't build an empire with soldiers. He built it with contracts. He didn't conquer land. He conquered infrastructure. And his weapon wasn't a sword. It was the railroad. Because in the late 1800s, if you wanted to move oil, you needed tracks. Rails connected cities, refineries, and markets. But they were expensive, and most oilmen paid whatever price the rail companies asked. Not Rockefeller. He didn't just use the railroads. He negotiated with them. Hard. He offered them something they couldn't resist. Volume. Predictability. Standard Oil could fill entire trains every day, nonstop. No gaps. No waiting. That kind of consistency was rare, and Rockefeller used it to demand lower rates. These discounts weren't illegal. Not yet. They were called rebates, and everyone wanted them. But Rockefeller didn't just take rebates. He demanded drawbacks. That meant when a rival shipped oil, Standard got a cut. Quietly, silently. So even when competitors sold their product, Rockefeller earned from it. It wasn't fair. It wasn't kind. But it worked. Standard Oil didn't need to outproduce others. It just needed to outmaneuver them. And by controlling the pipelines, the refineries, the barrels, the rail cars, and eventually the shipping routes, Rockefeller wasn't just in the oil business. He was the oil business. From the well to the flame, every step passed through his system. And if it didn't, it paid him for permission. Most competitors didn't stand a chance. Many sold their businesses to him outright. Some tried to fight. Those that did found suppliers backing out, banks calling in loans, and customers quietly switching sides. Standard didn't make threats, it made decisions. If you weren't part of the network, you were simply in the way. By the 1880s, Rockefeller's empire had spread beyond Cleveland. It reached New York, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Chicago. Entire regions depended on Standard Oil. And John, he didn't talk much, didn't party, didn't seek headlines. He walked quietly, attended church, took notes, watched, controlled. He saw business as a form of stewardship. Waste offended him. Chaos was his enemy. He believed in efficiency, order, and eliminating anything that distracted from the mission. But the mission wasn't just about oil anymore. It was about shaping the system, and that meant reshaping laws. Standard Oil didn't break the rules. It helped write them. Lawyers, lobbyists, bankers, all part of the same structure. And Rockefeller rarely had to appear in public. His name was on the documents. But the moves were made behind closed doors, through subsidiaries, through shell companies, through handshakes that never made the papers. The public didn't fully understand what was happening. Oil was cheaper than ever. Kerosene burned bright. Prices were steady. So no one asked too many questions. The system worked, but some people noticed. A few journalists, a few politicians. They started tracing the web, following the companies, finding the connections, and what they saw wasn't one company. It was dozens, maybe hundreds, all leading back to the same place. Standard Oil wasn't just a company. It was a structure, a quiet octopus with arms in every direction. Refineries, pipelines, railroads, banks, insurance firms, all linked, all feeding the core. And at the center was Rockefeller, calm, polite, writing letters, attending prayer meetings, giving to charities, while his empire quietly grew into something that would soon force the country to decide what power really looked like. Because when one man controls the thing that lights your home, fuels your factories, and powers your ships, it stops being about oil. It starts being about control, and not everyone was comfortable with that. By the time the 1890s rolled in, Rockefeller wasn't just a businessman. He was a force, not loud, not flashy, but present, constant, like gravity. You didn't always see him, but you felt the weight. Standard Oil touched everything, from the barrel maker in Ohio to the lamp merchant in Boston, the pipeline repairman in Pennsylvania to the banker in New York. If you turned on a light, Rockefeller's empire had already passed through the wires. He wasn't doing this alone. Standard Oil had managers, directors, a structure. But make no mistake, every major decision passed through him. He read reports daily, not summaries, full ledgers. He asked questions no one else bothered to ask. Why were we losing 3 cents per barrel on Route 4? Why did this refinery order twice as many staves in August? Why did this agent take a different train last week? He wasn't micromanaging. He was monitoring. He treated the company like a living system. Every detail mattered. Nothing was too small. And people noticed. Not just the competitors, not just the railroads, but the public, the newspapers, the government. America was changing. Cities were growing, populations rising, immigrants arriving by the boatload, factories booming, and with that boom came questions about labor, about wealth, about power. And one name kept showing up in the background: Rockefeller, the man with no scandals, no speeches, no theater, just endless, quiet influence. Then came Ida Tarbell, the daughter of a man who had once run a small oil business, a business swallowed by Standard. She was a journalist, careful, precise, not angry, just determined. She spent years investigating Standard Oil, reading legal documents, interviewing people, tracing the web. And what she found wasn't surprising to insiders, but it shocked the public. Rebates, secret agreements, dummy companies, political pressure, a network so vast and quiet that most people didn't even know they were part of it. Her articles were calm, factual, but devastating, and they hit at the right time, because Americans had started to feel uneasy about monopolies, about the idea that one man could hold so much influence over something as basic as fuel. Tarbell didn't call for revolution. She just opened the curtains, and when the sunlight hit the machinery, people started to ask hard questions. Politicians took notice. Antitrust laws, once vague ideas, began to grow teeth. Hearings were called, subpoenas issued, and Rockefeller, for the first time, felt pressure he couldn't control. He didn't panic. He didn't fight publicly. He stepped back, quietly, began transferring shares, letting younger executives handle statements. But even in retreat, he was strategic. He was preparing, because by then Rockefeller had already begun his next chapter. He wasn't just an oil man anymore. He was becoming something else, a philanthropist, a builder, a name that would echo through hospitals, universities, research institutes, not to erase the past, but to reshape it, and maybe to soften it. But the courts didn't care about intentions. In 1911, the Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil was a monopoly. It was ordered to break up into 34 separate companies. That should have been a defeat, a fall. But Rockefeller had planned too well. He owned shares in all of them, and when the pieces split, their combined value rose dramatically. The breakup made him richer. His control was gone, but his fortune bigger than ever. And now, free from direct management, he could focus on something even larger than oil, something that would touch lives not just in America, but around the world. By the time most men considered retirement, Rockefeller was starting something new. He had built the largest corporate structure in American history. He had seen it challenged, dismantled, and reborn in fragments that still answered to his will. And now, with more money than most countries and more time than he ever expected, he turned toward something quieter. Not business, not oil, but legacy. He believed in reason, in order, in planning. So it made sense that even his giving would follow a system. He didn't throw money at problems. He studied them, gathered data, hired experts, created foundations. He didn't want to give charity. He wanted to solve problems at their roots. For him, philanthropy was just another form of business. Same logic, same structure, just different outcomes. He began with education. He had never attended college, but he respected learning. He funded the University of Chicago, transforming it from a struggling institution into a national powerhouse. Quietly, efficiently, with the same attention to detail he had used in refining. He funded Spelman College, a school for African American women in Atlanta, named after his wife's family. He believed education should be practical, focused, structured. Then came medicine. In the early 20th century, American medicine was scattered. Some doctors trained in hospitals, some in barns. Some had licenses, some didn't. There were no standards, no coordination. Rockefeller saw the chaos and wanted to fix it. He created the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, not a hospital, a lab, a place for science, for experiments, for understanding disease before treating it. He also funded the General Education Board and the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission. Their goal wasn't just to treat patients, It was to eliminate illness at its root. They sent teams across the South to fight hookworm, not with miracles, with data, sanitation, education. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was effective, and it changed how Americans thought about public health. He didn't do this for applause. He rarely gave interviews, rarely smiled for cameras. He stayed in the background. The checks came. The projects grew. The headlines praised the results, but not always the man behind them. And that suited him, because he didn't seek admiration, he sought impact. But even as he gave away money, people never forgot how he made it. The name Rockefeller still sparked debate. Some saw a generous man, a devout Baptist, a father, a philanthropist. Others saw a ruthless monopolist, a symbol of greed, a man who crushed small businesses and rewrote the rules to suit himself. Rockefeller didn't respond to the criticism. He just kept working. Even in retirement, he kept office hours, managed his affairs, walked the gardens, wrote letters, counted his steps. At his estate in Pocantico Hills, New York, he built a kind of controlled paradise. Paths, trees, stones placed just right. A quiet place for a man who had spent decades making the world louder. And through it all, the companies he once led kept growing. Standard Oil of New Jersey would become Exxon. Standard Oil of New York would become Mobil. Others would merge, rebrand, expand. The breakup hadn't ended his influence. It had only scattered it. And through investments, trusts, and careful planning, Rockefeller's fortune didn't fade. It multiplied. By the time he reached his 80s, he had given away hundreds of millions. But even more remained, and his descendants were already stepping forward. New names, new roles, and a new era where the Rockefeller legacy would leave oil behind and enter the heart of American life in politics, culture, and the global stage. By the time Rockefeller passed 90, he had outlived most of his critics. His body was thin, his steps slower, but his mind remained sharp. He still reviewed papers, still wrote careful checks, still asked quiet questions about yields, schools, and hospitals. He smiled more often now, not because he had changed, but because the world had. His methods, once feared, had become textbooks. His tactics, once condemned, were now studied. But even as the man aged, the name grew younger. New Rockefellers stepped into the light. His children and grandchildren weren't just inheriting money. They were inheriting influence, and each one would carry it differently. His son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., was quieter than his father, less involved in business, more focused on public service. He didn't run oil companies. He funded restoration projects. He helped create Colonial Williamsburg. He donated land for the United Nations headquarters in New York. He didn't fight monopolies. He helped build foundations. He believed that wealth should be used to uplift, not dominate. And his children would carry that even further. The third generation, Nelson, David, Winthrop, Lawrence, and John III, became the public face of the family. They entered politics, finance, philanthropy, art. Nelson became governor of New York, then vice president of the United States. David led Chase Manhattan Bank and became one of the most connected financiers in the world. Lawrence focused on conservation and land. Winthrop became governor of Arkansas. John III focused on Asian art and international development. None of them were oil barons, but they were all power brokers. The Rockefeller name had shifted from industry to influence. And it wasn't just American. By mid-century, Rockefeller-funded institutions could be found around the world. Research centers in Europe, public health programs in Asia, educational initiatives in Africa and Latin America. The Rockefeller Foundation supported the Green Revolution, helping bring agricultural science to countries facing famine. They weren't just giving food, they were helping others grow it. Some called this altruism, others called it soft power. But either way, the reach was undeniable. Rockefeller money helped train doctors, scientists, diplomats. It helped map disease patterns, build public libraries, and fund the arts. And yet, the questions never fully disappeared. Could so much influence, even well-meaning, ever be truly neutral? Was the family solving problems or shaping the solutions? Who decided what was best for others? The Rockefellers rarely answered directly. They preferred actions over explanations. But behind the scenes, they kept records, letters, reports, meetings, every dollar tracked, every result measured. The legacy wasn't accidental, it was managed. Even in culture, the name appeared. Museums, concert halls, university buildings, skyscrapers. Rockefeller Center in New York became a symbol of ambition and modernity. Its golden statue, its soaring tower, its Christmas tree, all quietly tied to a family that had once sold kerosene by the barrel. By the late 20th century, oil was no longer at the center of the legacy. Finance, diplomacy, global development, those had taken its place, and the younger Rockefellers began speaking out in new ways. Some criticized oil companies, some promoted environmentalism, some challenged corporate power. It was a strange reversal, the heirs of a monopolist now calling for reform. And yet, the core stayed the same, a belief in systems, in structure, in careful planning. The world had changed, but the family's approach had not. Still methodical, still strategic, still quiet. By the end of the 20th century, the Rockefeller name had become more than a name. It was a symbol of wealth, of power, of something deeply woven into the fabric of American identity. For some, it meant generosity, a family that had given more than any other in modern history. For others, it meant control, a dynasty that never truly disappeared, just changed its shape. There were books, documentaries, conspiracies. People imagined secret meetings, private deals, hidden agendas. The Rockefellers rarely responded. Their silence fed speculation. Their caution became myth. But the truth was simpler and quieter. The family had become a network, not a monarchy, no central figure, just people connected by blood, name, and a certain way of seeing the world. A belief in responsibility, in planning, in staying 3 steps ahead. And yet, that didn't stop the scrutiny. The oil industry, once the engine of progress, became the focus of criticism. Environmental damage, climate change, corporate lobbying. As the world faced new problems, the legacy of fossil fuels came under the microscope, and the Rockefeller family, knowingly or not, stood at the intersection. In 2016, the Rockefeller Family Fund made headlines, not for a donation, but for a decision. They would divest from fossil fuels publicly. They criticized ExxonMobil, a direct descendant of Standard Oil, for misleading the public about climate change. The symbolism was heavy. The heirs of the oil dynasty were turning away from oil, not quietly, not reluctantly, but with intent. It was a signal. That legacy was not just about defending the past. It was about shaping the future. And the family continued to invest in clean energy, in education, in diplomacy, in art. They supported projects that didn't bring profits, just progress. Their foundations funded reports, discussions, data collection. It wasn't about flash, it was about infrastructure, just like it had always been. But not everyone was convinced. Some argued that no amount of giving could balance the scale, that the original fortune, built on ruthless deals and broken competitors, still cast too long a shadow. That power, once taken, couldn't simply be rebranded. That influence wasn't neutral. It shaped policy, opinion, opportunity, and still the family persisted, without titles, without thrones, but with offices, with advisors, with strategy. They remained involved, sometimes visibly, sometimes not, but never without a plan, because even as the world grew louder, the Rockefellers stayed quiet. Their influence didn't need volume, it needed structure. The institutions they built remained. The University of Chicago, Rockefeller University, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Museum of Modern Art, public parks, public programs, international networks. In many ways, the real legacy wasn't oil. It was systems, endowments, frameworks, ways to keep shaping the world long after the original names faded from memory. John D. Rockefeller himself died in 1937, quietly, at 97 years old. By then, he had given away more than $500 million. Adjusted for today, that number would stretch far beyond. But his money didn't vanish. It multiplied, spread. It moved into institutions, into trust funds, into policies that still echo. He didn't want a monument. He didn't build statues of himself. He believed that wealth, once earned, had to be used, not just to help, but to structure help, to make it repeatable, measurable, lasting. And that mindset, more than any barrel of oil, may be his real invention. Today, the name Rockefeller still lingers on buildings, on grants, on plaques and reports and institutions that most people never trace back to a man who once sold kerosene by the gallon. He doesn't trend on social media. He doesn't fill documentaries with drama, but his fingerprints remain quiet, infrastructural, deep. You see it in the way modern philanthropy is organized: strategic giving, measurable outcomes, multi-generational planning. These weren't accidents. They were models, tested, refined, scaled. Rockefeller treated giving like a system, just like he once treated oil. And that model spread to other billionaires, to universities, to global foundations. You also see it in how modern corporations think. Vertical integration, market control, supply chain dominance, legal insulation. The playbook wasn't invented by him, but he wrote some of its most enduring chapters. And even when laws changed, the ideas remained, refined, reshaped, but still recognizable. And still, the debates go on. Was he a genius or a tyrant? A builder or a breaker? Did he uplift society or bend it toward his will? The truth, as always, is somewhere between. He was not a villain. He was not a saint. He was a man who understood pressure, structure, leverage. A man who saw chaos and chose control. A man who watched the world change and decided not to follow it, but to shape it. And shaping meant seeing farther. He didn't invest in things for today. He built things for decades. He didn't buy headlines. He funded systems. He didn't chase admiration. He designed influence. That influence wasn't always clean. It wasn't always fair, but it was always deliberate. And long after the wells dried and the rail cars rusted, the structures remained. You can find them in public health policies, in educational standards, in the very idea that massive private wealth should have a public purpose. You can argue with it, question it, challenge its origins, but you can't ignore it because it's already built in. And the name? It keeps moving, quietly, through boardrooms, through scholarships, through archives and meetings and family offices. No one ever films. The Rockefellers don't rule, but they still matter. Their money doesn't roar. It whispers, patiently, into the ears of researchers, artists, negotiators, planners, and somewhere behind it all, still faintly visible, is the image of a boy from Richford, watching his father disappear, counting coins, balancing ledgers, learning early that the world is only safe when you can measure it. That chaos is just a system no one's controlled yet. That security isn't given, it's built, brick by brick, deal by deal, step by step. He didn't want to be remembered for oil. He wanted to be remembered for what came after, for what could last, for the things people don't see, lights that stay on, clinics that stay open, data that stays consistent, systems that don't collapse when the hands behind them grow old. And that may be the strange magic of Rockefeller, that a man so tied to industry, competition, and power could leave behind something so quiet, so lasting, so easily overlooked. A structure that never needed to be loved, just kept, maintained, and, in time, forgotten, not in name, but in presence. Because when a system works, people stop noticing it. They use it, rely on it, and assume it's always been there, like pipes under a city, like light in a room, like a road that's always dry, like influence that doesn't ask permission, just enters, sits quietly, and stays